my name's Dr. Roger Henderson and I'm a GP in the southwest of Scotland, and I also co-host the GPnotebook study groups. Welcome to this GPnotebook podcast, where we discuss bite-sized topics aimed at all those working in primary care. You can find us on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, so do please follow us to receive notifications about new episodes, and if you like what you hear, do please consider leaving a review to help other listeners find us. You can also follow us on Twitter at GPnotebook for more information about new podcast episodes and study groups, and you can find me there too at Roger the Doctor. Finally, you can visit GPnotebook.com for podcast episode show notes and to find out more about upcoming study group meetings. Now, in this podcast, I thought I'd discuss emollient therapy and the basics of emollient treatment in general practice. And with 1 in 4 consultations in primary care being linked to skin-related conditions, the use of emollients is absolutely key in many of those. And as we all know, emollients are quite simply moisturisers that help to keep the skin soft and hydrated, and they are probably the most important treatment in all dry skin conditions. Quite simply because rehydrated skin is better able to restore its protective function than dry skin. There's also no question that typically emollients are underused, but when they are used correctly can significantly reduce the need for topical steroid use. And as you'll know, the terms moisturiser and emollient are often used interchangeably. Now, going hand in hand with emollient therapy should be the avoidance of detergent use, by which I mean things like soaps, shampoos, bubble baths, hand washes and shower gels. And they also include soap-free products. So, to dive into these in a little more detail, emollients essentially help to prevent transepidermal water loss from the skin by providing an occlusive layer over the stratum corneum surface of the skin. That trapped water then passes back into the corneocytes, causing them to swell and then improve the integrity of the skin barrier. Now, some emollients also contain humectant ingredients such as natural moisturizing factors like glycerine or urea. But the fundamental treatment for dry skin conditions is something we would call complete emollient therapy, CET. And quite simply, the goal of complete emollient therapy is to keep our skin well moisturized to help repair the skin barrier. In a nutshell, CET I think is best described as everything that goes on the skin should be emollient based, and all soaps should be replaced with emollient wash products. That fundamentally is CET, and the key principle is using emollients to wash with, followed by the application of an emollient that is left on. An emollient should always be used instead of soaps and bubble baths and cosmetic washes, quite simply because these all contain detergents that can dry out the skin. So let's look at the various types of emollients that are available to us, not only in the high street but also for us to prescribe. Let's start with the common one, creams. Now, creams are a mixture of water and oil, so they're more effective than things like lotions at preventing transepidermal water loss. They're easy to spread, they're not usually greasy, and so they can also be used easily in the daytime from a practical and cosmetic point of view as a way of topping up the moisturizer of the skin. Now, creams can contain preservatives and in some patients may potentially cause skin reactions, although in my experience you would be unlucky to have a reaction from an emollient cream. Ointments, on the other hand, are thicker and greasier than creams and also lotions, which can make them less cosmetically acceptable, but they're more effective at occlusion and typically contain fewer preservatives than lotions and creams, and so make them more suitable for people who may react to additives. Bath oils are added to the bath water, while emollient shower preparations are applied directly to the skin during showering. And both these products clean and hydrate the skin and at the same time coat it in a thin layer of oil to prevent water loss. And some of them can contain antimicrobial and anti-itch properties, which may be beneficial for some patients. Lotions, on the other hand, have a high water content. They're very easy to spread, but because of this, they're less effective at rehydrating very dry skin due to a lesser occlusive effect than creams and ointments. But they can be very useful for mild to moderate dry skin problems, especially for daytime use due to their speed of absorption. Gels have a higher emolliency than a cream, but without the greasiness of an ointment. And again, they form a protective barrier to help retain moisture and rehydrate the skin. And they can also contain humectants such as propylene glycol, lactic acid, urea or glycerol to attract and hold water in the outer layers of the skin. So how do we best choose an emollient for our patient? Well, as a very general rule, the drier the skin, the greasier the emollient should be, certainly in the initial stages of treatment. But patient preference is also absolutely essential to encourage adherence. So always consider the practicality and the cosmetic impact of any emollient you choose. They should be applied at least twice a day, but patients with a very dry skin condition should aim for 3 to 4 daily applications initially, although in the long term they may be able to cut this back to once or twice. But many patients do underestimate the frequency of use, so this should be always made clear during consultations with them, and discuss daily routines with patients to help identify suitable times to apply. Now, one of the key messages I'd like to get across from this podcast is never, and I really do mean never, use aqueous cream as an emollient. Why? Simply because this contains sodium lauryl sulfate, which has a detrimental effect on the skin barrier function to the point of being actively harmful to patients with dry skin. We also almost certainly, generally, underprescribe how much emollient we should be using for our patients. And if you just want to sort of give yourself a second and think, well, how much emollient should we use in an adult who needs it for the full body use, then an adult should use at least 500 grams of emollient per week, with a child using at least 250 grams of emollient. Unless you are using it for someone's pocket or handbag, never use 30-gram tubes of emollients. Smaller sample containers may be useful for portable use away from the home, of course, but many patients do underestimate the quantity of emollient required. And it can also be useful to quantify the amounts with the patient of how much emollient is being used. So, for example, 4 grams would be the equivalent of 1 pump from a pump dispenser or 1 teaspoon. So to give an example of what we should be prescribing per 1 week prescription for someone with dry skin, if we're just looking at the face, then 15 to 30 grams of cream or ointment per week, or 100 mils of lotion. For the hands, 25 to 50 grams of cream or ointment, or 200 mils of lotion. For the scalp, 50 to 100 grams of cream or ointment, or 200 mils of lotion. For the arms or legs, 1 to 200 grams of creams or ointment, or 200 mils of lotion. For the groin and genitals, 15 to 25 grams of cream or ointment and 100 mils of lotion. And for the trunk, 100 to 250 grams of cream or ointment, or 500 mils of lotion. When we're giving advice to our patients about how to apply an emollient, some of the key information to discuss and demonstrate includes washing your hands before you put an emollient on, simply to avoid cross-infection. It's also very important to tell patients their fingernails should be kept short and smooth to reduce the likelihood of accidental scratching on application. You always should apply an emollient gently in the direction of hair growth of the skin in long, smooth strokes. Do not rub up and down or rub continuously, as this can generate heat, inflammation and aggravate itching. And if a patient is putting large quantities of emollients on, and if the emollient is not in a pump dispenser, then advise the patient to scoop out the required amount for one application with a clean spoon each time to reduce the possibility of contamination. If we're using emollients with other products, establish first with your patient that topical steroids should not be used to provide an emollient effect. But in moderate to severe cases, topical steroids can be used before or after emollient application. And in an ideal world, we should try to ensure a gap of at least 15 minutes between applications of emollients and topical steroids, although I do grant you this is not always practical. I'm often asked by patients which should go on first, doctor, the emollient or the topical steroid, and the evidence probably is that it doesn't really matter. But to my way of thinking, I always say to them, put the emollient on first. Why? Because then you've got nicely hydrated skin that helps the topical steroid absorb a little bit more optimally than you may have if it's going on to very dry skin. If your patient is using other topical treatments, such as, for example, topical calcineurin inhibitors, these have slightly more precise instructions. So, for example, there's a 2-hour gap recommended between emollients and tacrolimus, and a slightly shorter gap for pimecrolimus. So some of the key messages here, just remember about using emollients with our patients. Informed patient choice from the spectrum of available emollients is key to optimizing emollient therapy. And when considering the choice of emollient, consider the class of emollient, the frequency of application, and occasionally the price. Always prescribe sufficient quantities and never prescribe 30 grams unless you're doing it for someone's pocket or purse or handbag. Emollient should ideally be applied several times a day, and products containing humectants can give greater barrier repair than ones without. But there is never a place for aqueous cream products, even as washing agents. Finally, correct emollient usage reduces skin flares, it reduces the need to treat flares, it reduces the need for topical steroids, and it reduces both primary and secondary care consultations, all of which are excellent reasons to get it right. And I do hope you found this podcast on them helpful. Please have a look at the show notes that accompany this episode at GPnotebook.com, and we'd be very grateful if you'd consider following the podcast and leaving us a review on your favourite podcast platform. Do feel free to get in touch via social media at GPnotebook or email us support@GPnotebook.com if you have any questions, comments or ideas for future podcasts. You should also visit us at GPnotebook.com to register for our virtual GP Notebook study groups, which occur all year round, and to download free shortcuts to help improve the lives of our patients in primary care. But as always, thank you so much for listening, and until the next time, goodbye.
Bye.